On Christmas Eve, the air outside felt softer than usual, as if the cold itself had wrapped the night in a gentle hush. I stepped out of the house with a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in months, a tiny spark of hope I tried to protect from the wind. For weeks, something heavy had been sitting inside me, questions I didn't want to ask, doubts I didn't want to acknowledge, and a loneliness I didn't want to name. But tonight, I wanted to try. I wanted to surprise my husband, Daniel, the way I used to when our marriage still felt whole. I had spent the afternoon preparing a warm Christmas Eve dinner, imagining his tired face lighting up when he saw me waiting for him. But as the hours passed with no message from him, something tugged at me, urging me to go to him instead of waiting in silence. So I grabbed my coat, locked the door, and stepped into the crisp night with a nervous hope beating beneath my ribs. The drive to his office was quiet, the streets lit with soft chains of Christmas lights that made every house look more alive than mine had felt in months. Each glowing window felt like a reminder of something I'd lost: warmth, closeness, the simple comfort of knowing someone was coming home to me. As I drove, my mind wandered to the small changes I'd noticed in him lately: the late nights, the tired excuses, the distance in his voice whenever I asked if he was okay. Still, I kept telling myself that stress could change people. Work could change people. Marriage could go through phases. Maybe tonight would be the beginning of something better. Maybe surprising him would break whatever quiet wall had formed between us. When I finally turned into the parking lot of his office building, I felt a flutter of nervous excitement. But the moment my headlights swept across the lot, something inside me stilled. His car wasn't there. The spot he always chose, the spot he called his corner, was empty, a clean patch of snow where his tires should have been. I blinked, leaning forward, scanning the rows again. Nothing. A faint uneasiness began to spread through me, thin but sharp, like a crack forming in ice. Maybe he parked somewhere else because of the snow. Maybe someone took his spot. Maybe he got a ride with a coworker. The more excuses I whispered to myself, the less convincing they sounded. I pulled into an empty space and stared at the quiet building. The lights were still on inside, dim but enough to cast a pale glow through the windows. For a moment, I waited, imagining him walking out with a surprised smile once he saw me. But the minutes passed, and the cold crept deeper, settling into my hands, my shoulders, my thoughts. I grabbed my phone, checking for messages. Nothing. No missed calls, no updates, just silence. I swallowed hard and told myself not to panic, not to think too much, not to assume the worst. But the truth was, something in my gut had already begun to twist, telling me that tonight wouldn't unfold the way I had hoped. After a long minute, I stepped out of the car, letting the snow crunch beneath my boots. My breath fogged in the air as I walked closer to the building, the wind brushing against my cheeks like a warning. I stood near the glass doors, watching the empty hallway inside. The building looked almost abandoned, too quiet for Christmas Eve, too still for a place Daniel claimed he had to stay late at. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself that he was probably just finishing something upstairs, that any second the elevator doors would open and he'd see me waiting. But the longer I stood there, the heavier the silence became. Then the doors finally opened, but it wasn't Daniel. A coworker of his walked out, bundled in a large coat, moving quickly toward his car. He didn't notice me, didn't look around, didn't even hesitate as he hurried into the cold. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click, leaving the world quiet again. And in that quiet, something inside me shifted. A small trembling realization began to form, one I didn't want, one I wasn't ready for, one that felt like the beginning of a truth that could break me. The night felt heavier, as if it knew something I didn't. And deep inside, beneath the cold and the hope and the doubt, I felt the first sharp sting of fear that this Christmas Eve would change everything. The coworker's car disappeared down the snowy road, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the winter air. I stayed standing near the entrance, my breath fogging in front of me, my fingers stiff from the cold and from the uneasy fear twisting deeper inside my chest. A part of me whispered that I should go home and forget this strange feeling growing in my stomach. Another part of me, The part that had felt ignored and pushed aside for months refused to leave. Something was wrong, and tonight I could no longer convince myself otherwise. I slipped back into my car for warmth, staring at the building as if it might explain where Daniel really was. My hands curled tightly around the steering wheel as I thought about the small signs I had brushed aside: his sudden distance, the new passcode on his phone, the nights he came home smelling like a perfume that wasn't mine. My heart insisted that I was imagining things, but my instincts were louder tonight, impossible to silence. After a few minutes, I decided to circle the building, telling myself it was only to reassure my restless mind. Maybe he had parked on the other side. Maybe he had stepped out for a break. I tried to soften the knot of anxiety twisting inside me with excuses that no longer felt convincing. As I walked through the snow, the cold seeped into my boots, but it still felt warmer than the dread settling into me. The night was quiet except for the low hum of the wind brushing past the building. When I turned the corner, I stopped abruptly. At the far edge of the lot, half hidden behind a row of trees, was Daniel's car. He had never parked there in all the years I had known him. The spot was dark, distant, and clearly chosen to avoid being seen. A tremor ran through me, a faint but undeniable warning. I walked toward the car slowly, each step heavier than the last, my breath catching in short bursts. The windows were fogged from the inside, faint streaks of condensation blurring the glass. My heart slammed against my ribs as I pressed my hand to the window, feeling the cold bite into my palm. I saw movement inside, not one shadow, but two. For a moment, my mind refused to believe it. Maybe he was giving someone a ride. Maybe a coworker had needed help. But deep inside me, a truth I had been avoiding for months rose sharp and painful. I stepped back, my breath shaking. I forced myself to move toward the driver's side, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Then I heard a soft sound from inside the car, light, warm, and unmistakably feminine. A laugh, a woman's laugh. It floated out with a softness that felt like it sliced straight through me. My world narrowed, my heartbeat thundering in my ears, everything around me slowing into a painful blur. Daniel's voice followed, low and intimate, the kind of tone he hadn't used with me in months. I felt something inside me fracture. My hands dropped to my sides as I closed my eyes briefly, wishing I could rewind the night, wishing I had never come here, wishing I could unhear the truth forming around me. My body felt frozen, not from the cold, but from heartbreak, the kind that crept through your bones before you even dared to face it directly. The snow continued falling lightly, peaceful and quiet, as if mocking the storm rising inside me. I remembered our past Christmases, the warmth and laughter we once shared. Those memories felt distant now, like they belonged to another lifetime. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold together the pieces that already felt like they were slipping apart. I drew in a shaky breath, knowing I couldn't walk away without facing the truth. My hand lifted again, trembling as it hovered over the door handle. For one last fragile moment, I hesitated, standing between the life I knew and the one that was about to break open completely. Then, with a courage I didn't feel but desperately needed, I pulled the handle and the world shattered. The door didn't swing open dramatically the way I had imagined in the split second before my hand pulled the handle. It opened slowly, almost too slowly, as if the cold air itself resisted revealing what was inside. Warm fog slipped out first, followed by a faint perfume I didn't recognize. Then the scene unfolded, piece by piece, like a nightmare choosing to reveal itself gently, just to hurt more. Daniel jerked upright in the driver's seat, his eyes widening, his hand scrambling to pull his coat across his lap. Beside him, a woman, someone I had never seen before, pulled her hair forward, her fingers shaking as she tried to cover the exposed skin of her shoulder. Her lipstick was smudged, her breath was unsteady, and her eyes refused to meet mine. For a moment, the world stopped moving. The snow hung in the air as if frozen mid-fall. The cold numbed my face, but the sting of betrayal warmed my cheeks in a strange, burning way. I stood there, my hand still gripping the door, unable to step forward or backward. My heart beat too loudly, too painfully, and yet the only sound I heard was Daniel whispering my name in a voice that didn't sound like guilt, just panic at being caught. The woman beside him shifted slightly, pressing herself against the seat, her gaze fixed on her hands, as if she was ashamed, or maybe just scared. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Words felt too small, too fragile, too useless. Daniel stuttered something, an excuse, a broken string of syllables that didn't form anything meaningful. I watched his lips move but couldn't process a single word. My mind was too busy memorizing the details of the moment. The way his wedding ring gleamed under the dim light, the way his eyebrow twitched when he was nervous, the way his hand instinctively tried to reach for mine even though he had no right to touch me anymore. I stepped back before he could make contact. The space between us felt like the edge of a cliff, and I refused to let him pull me into that darkness with him. "Who is she?" The question came out quieter than I expected, my voice trembling in a way that betrayed how hard I was trying to stay composed. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, as if searching for a version of the truth he could survive saying. The woman finally looked at me, her eyes glossy, with something that resembled regret. She opened her mouth, maybe to speak, maybe to defend herself, but Daniel cut her off, saying her name in a tone that made my stomach twist. He had never said my name with that softness, not in months. The truth wasn't just visible now, it was undeniable, tangible. It sat in the air between us, heavy and cruel. I felt something inside me shift, not break, but detach, like a piece of trust I had carried for years finally letting go. I straightened my back, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to stand tall even as the world I knew cracked beneath my feet. Daniel begged me to listen, reaching out again, his voice shaking with an urgency that made the betrayal sting even more. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry I saw it. "I came to surprise you," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. "On Christmas Eve." The words trembled out of me like pieces of a confession I never wanted to make. Daniel's expression collapsed into something that almost resembled shame, but it came too late. The woman looked away again, guilt settling across her features like frost. Without another word, I stepped back from the car and let the cold swallow me whole. Daniel called after me, his voice echoing across the empty lot, but I kept walking, each step heavier than the last, each breath sharper, each heartbeat a reminder that the life I thought I knew had changed forever in the span of a single winter night. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I simply walked away from the broken truth behind me, even though part of me knew it would follow me everywhere. The cold felt different once I stepped away from that car. It no longer stung my skin. It went deeper, sinking into my bones, settling somewhere behind my ribs, where the shock still pulsed like a bruise. Daniel's voice chased me across the empty parking lot, calling my name again and again, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My legs carried me forward on instinct, as if my body understood something my heart refused to accept. If I looked back, even once, the pain would swallow me whole. The world felt strangely quiet except for the crunch of snow beneath my boots, each sound echoing too loudly in the stillness. Christmas lights flickered from the windows above, but they felt like decorations for a life that didn't belong to me anymore. My vision blurred slightly, not from tears, those still hadn't come, but from the pressure pounding behind my eyes. I reached my car and gripped the door handle, breathing in small, uneven gasps as I tried to steady myself. My fingers shook uncontrollably, and I pressed my forehead against the cold metal, letting it cool the fire burning inside me. My body felt both too heavy and too light, like I was somehow floating and collapsing at the same time. I closed my eyes, and the image of Daniel's car flashed behind my eyelids, the fogged windows, the woman's exposed shoulder, Daniel's voice filled with a softness that didn't belong to me anymore. I felt my stomach twist, a sharp, painful churn that threatened to drag me down. When I finally opened my eyes, Daniel was running toward me, his footsteps frantic in the snow. "Please, wait," he begged, his breath ragged. I stepped into my car before he reached me, slamming the door shut even though my hands trembled violently. He tapped on the window, desperation coloring his voice. "Let me explain. It's not what you think. Just let me talk." His words hit me harder than the cold ever could. Not what I think. I wanted to laugh, scream, cry, or maybe do all three. But I just sat there, staring straight ahead, my hands gripping the steering wheel. So tightly my knuckles turned white. I could feel the weight of his presence on the other side of the glass, but I refused to look at him. I started the engine, the low hum filling the silence between us. Daniel pounded on the window once, just once, and then the sound faded as if even he realized nothing he said now could erase what I had seen. The woman stayed by his car, her head lowered, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I backed out slowly, my breath shaky, my throat burning as I swallowed down the rising ache inside me. As I drove away, the parking lot grew smaller in my rearview mirror, the lights dimming until they disappeared completely. Only then, when the building was out of sight and Daniel's figure was swallowed by darkness, did my tears finally break free. They came not as a flood, but as a slow, uncontrollable stream. My hands shook on the wheel as I drove through the quiet streets, the world around me blurry through the sting of heartbreak. Christmas decorations glowed from the houses I passed, warm windows, families gathered inside, laughter spilling out onto the snow. It felt like the entire world was celebrating while mine was crumbling silently. I felt small, lost, and painfully alone. Every turn I took led me deeper into the night, farther from the life I thought I had, and closer to the painful truth I could no longer avoid. I didn't go home. I couldn't face the living room where we had put up the tree together, or the gifts wrapped neatly under it. I couldn't sit in the silence of the house, knowing his lies still lingered in the air. Instead, I parked near a small overlook on the edge of town, the city lights stretching out below like a blurred constellation. I leaned back in my seat and let the tears come freely, my body shaking with every breath. It felt like grief and betrayal and disbelief tangled into one unbearable weight. Somewhere in that quiet darkness, I whispered the only question that mattered. Why wasn't I enough? But the night gave me no answer. Only the cold wind, brushing against my car, as if reminding me that some truths hurt not because they're complicated, but because they're clear. I stayed parked at the overlook for a long time, watching the distant lights blink in and out like they were breathing with me. My tears eventually slowed, then stopped, leaving behind a hollow ache that pulsed through every inch of me. I didn't know what time it was, only that the night felt endless. I replayed everything, the fogged windows, the soft laughter, Daniel's panicked face, and each memory struck like fresh shards of glass. I felt stripped bare, but in that terrifying emptiness, something new began to settle. It wasn't strength, not yet, just a quiet awareness. My life had split into a before and an after, and the after would never be the same. When the first faint hint of dawn colored the sky, I wiped my face with numb fingers and sat up. The world outside was still, covered in untouched snow that glowed faintly under the early light. A strange calm washed over me. My heart still hurt, deeply, sharply, but beneath the pain was a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I finally understood something I had been too afraid to admit. The version of Daniel I was grieving wasn't the man I had seen in that car. It was a man I thought he was, a man I had invented from memories, hopes, and trust he no longer deserved. I drove home slowly, the roads quiet and empty. When I stepped inside the house, the scent of pine from our Christmas tree filled the air. It hit me harder than I expected. The lights were still on, twinkling softly in the dim morning. I walked closer, my hands trembling, tracing the ornaments we had hung together. Each little memory felt tainted now, but also strangely distant, like they belonged to another couple who no longer existed. I sank onto the couch and let myself breathe deeply, letting the silence settle around me. A little while later, I heard the door open. Daniel stepped in hesitantly, his face pale, his eyes swollen from crying or worry. I couldn't tell. He whispered my name, but I didn't respond. I didn't have the strength to unravel his excuses or listen to the tangled explanations he was ready to throw at me. He sat across from me, his hands shaking as he tried to reach for mine. I pulled my hand back before he touched it. "I made a mistake," he said, voice breaking. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I wasn't seeing the man I had built my dreams around. I was seeing the man who had broken them. "I know," I whispered, "but you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice." He froze, his mouth opening slightly as if he had never considered that difference before. I watched realization settle in his eyes, slow and heavy. He began to cry, but for once, his tears didn't shake me. They didn't pull at my sympathy the way they used to. I felt sad, deeply sad, but I didn't feel responsible for comforting him. Not anymore. He apologized over and over, promising to fix things, to change, to heal us. But there are some things you can't glue back together, not because they're broken beyond repair, but because you finally understand your worth without them. And I did, finally. "I'm leaving," I said quietly, calm in a way that surprised even me. Daniel stared at me, disbelief spreading across his face. "We can go to counseling. We can talk. Please don't—" "I'm leaving," I repeated, and this time the strength in my voice felt like the first real breath I had taken in months. His shoulders collapsed, his head dropping into his hands. But I didn't waver. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, and began packing only what was mine, only what I needed. I didn't rush. I didn't slam doors. I simply moved with a kind of peaceful finality, like someone stepping out of a burning house before the flames reached them. When I walked past him toward the door, Daniel whispered something I'll never forget. "I didn't think you'd actually go." I paused for just a moment. "That's the problem," I said. Then I stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The sky was brighter now, streaked with soft colors that promised a new day. The cold hit my skin, but instead of shrinking from it, I welcomed it. It felt honest, something Daniel hadn't been in a long time. As I walked toward my car, snow crunching beneath my feet, I realized something quietly powerful. I wasn't walking away from my life. I was walking back to myself, and that was the first gift I had given myself in a long, long time.